Tonight, I humbly step into the sandals of one of Rome's greatest generals and engineers to present to you the final reflections of Marcus Agrippa. Now, without preamble or further ado, history awaits. The fever comes and goes like the tide at Ostia. When it recedes, clarity returns, and I find myself drifting between present pain and vivid memories. My bedchamber on the Palatine Hill seems both familiar and strange, like a harbour visited long ago during campaign. The sounds of Rome, my Rome, filter through the shuttered windows. A constant reminder of the life that continues beyond these walls. 51 years of life have brought me here, to this ornate bed with its carved cypress posts and fine Egyptian linens. The irony isn't lost on me. I, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, who slept on bare ground during countless campaigns, now lie surrounded by luxury that my father could never have imagined for his son. A slave adjusts my pillows with gentle hands. His name escapes me, which troubles my mind. I, who could remember the name of every centurion in a legion, now struggle with the identity of the man who tends to my basic needs. Perhaps it's fitting that as death approaches, the details begin to blur. "Leave me," I tell him. "I wish to rest." Alone now, my gaze wanders across the painted ceiling, one of my own designs, adapted from something I saw in Athens in my youth. How strange that in creating the face of Rome, I drew from all the conquered lands. We Romans have always been collectors of territories, of peoples, of ideas. Outside, a cart rumbles over stones I ordered laid. The sound reminds me of legions on the march, a rhythm that has followed me through decades. War and building, destruction and creation, the twin activities that have occupied most of my days. Augustus, still Octavian in my most private thoughts, will come soon. He always visits when the physicians look grave. Our lives have been intertwined since boyhood, though he soared while I provided the steady winds beneath his wings. I don't resent this. It was the natural order of things, like water flowing downhill. What to make of this life? A commoner who became consul 3 times. A general who never lost a battle. The builder of monuments that will stand for centuries. The friend of an emperor. The husband of his daughter. Father to children who carry the future of Rome in their veins. And yet, there are regrets that nestle in the corners of my mind, shadowy things that emerge when the fever rises, paths not taken, words unsaid, blood spilled that perhaps need not have been. The light shifts as the sun changes position. Time passes, slipping through my fingers like water from a broken aqueduct. How did we come to this moment, Octavian and I? From boys studying in Greece to men who reshaped the world. The story doesn't seem quite real, even to one who lived it. I close my eyes, not to sleep, but to see more clearly the images of the past. Yes, it begins to take shape now, the narrative of a life spent in service to a friend, to Rome, to an idea of what the world could be. If I am to leave anything behind besides stone and mortar, perhaps it should be this: the truth of how it was, as best as I can recall it. And so I begin to remember, deliberately now, starting at the beginning, with two young men and the future stretching before them, unwritten. The academy in Apollonia smelled of olive oil and dust. I recall the warmth of the stone bench beneath me as I watched the new arrival, a slender youth with careful eyes, who they said was the grandnephew of Julius Caesar himself. Octavian, they called him then. He walked with the confidence of one who knew his place in the world was assured, yet there was something in his manner that spoke of calculation rather than arrogance. I was 19, he a year younger, though the difference seemed greater. My hands were already calloused from practical work, my mind bent toward problems of engineering and tactics. His were the smooth hands of a patrician, his mind honed for politics and persuasion. "You're Agrippa," he said to me one afternoon, settling beside me in the shade of a cypress tree. It wasn't a question. I learned later that he made it his business to know everyone of potential use to him. "They say you designed improvements to the water system here." "A simple matter of gradient and pipe width," I replied, surprised he had heard of it. His smile was measured, revealing precisely the amount of warmth needed for the moment. "Nothing about water is simple. It is the lifeblood of any city." And so began a conversation that, in some ways, never ended. We spoke of Rome, of Caesar's campaigns in Gaul, of the merits of different building materials, of Aristotle and Plato. By sunset, I understood that his interest in me was genuine, if also practical. He collected people as others collected coins or statuary, each one valued for their particular qualities. My own family was respectable but undistinguished. My father had managed to provide me with enough education to lift our name from obscurity, but the gulf between my prospects and those of Caesar's heir was vast. Yet Octavian seemed unconcerned with such distinctions when it came to forming alliances. "Come to my quarters tomorrow," he said as we parted. "I've received some interesting correspondence from Rome." The next day, I found him surrounded by scrolls, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The political situation grows more complex," he told me, gesturing to the letters. "My great-uncle makes enemies as readily as he conquers territories." I remember thinking that this was an odd confidence to share with a near stranger. Only later did I understand that Octavian rarely said anything without purpose. He was testing me, assessing my discretion and my political acumen. Over the following months, we became inseparable. I found myself drawn to his vision of Rome, orderly, powerful, just. He, in turn, seemed to value my pragmatism and lack of pretension, where his other companions, like Maecenas, spoke of poetry and rhetoric. I spoke of bridges and siege engines. It amused him. "You see the world as it is, not as you wish it to be," he told me once. "That's rare and useful." Useful. The word that would define our relationship for decades to come. We were still in Apollonia when the news arrived. Caesar had been assassinated, stabbed 23 times in the Senate house. I found Octavian alone, his face a mask of control, though his hands trembled slightly as he held Caesar's will. He adopted me as his son, he said quietly. I am now Gaius, Julius, Caesar, Octavianus. I remained silent, understanding that the world had just shifted beneath our feet. The carefree days of philosophical debates and architectural discussions were over. Octavian, Caesar now, in name if not yet in power, was looking beyond me, seeing the complicated web of alliances and enmities that awaited him in Rome. Will you come with me? He asked finally. It wasn't really a question. We both knew I would follow him, not just out of friendship, though that was real enough, but because even then I recognized that his destiny would shape the destiny of Rome itself, and I wanted to be part of building whatever came next. Of course, I said simply. He nodded, as if my answer confirmed something he already knew. It will be dangerous. Others won't welcome my claim. The assassins still hold influence. The Legion's loyalty is uncertain. Then we'll need to be careful, I replied, and resourceful. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Yes, and I'll need people I can trust. Absolutely. His gaze met mine. Can I trust you, Marcus Agrippa? I didn't hesitate. With your life. He extended his arm, and we clasped forearms in the traditional manner of Roman men pledging loyalty. His grip was surprisingly strong for one who appeared so scholarly. Then let us return to Rome, he said, and claim what is ours. Rome, in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination, was a city holding its breath. I remember our arrival, Octavian moving with deliberate humility, refusing the escort of soldiers that his friends advised. I come as Caesar's heir, not as a warlord, he said, though we both knew that force might eventually be necessary. The Senate was fractured, caught between relief at Caesar's death and fear of what would follow. Mark Antony, Caesar's right hand, had seized control of the treasury and Caesar's papers. He received Octavian with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, a powerful man humoring a boy he didn't consider a threat. How badly he misjudged you, I said to Octavian after that first meeting. He was reviewing Caesar's will, which named him as primary heir and awarded a substantial sum to every Roman citizen. Antony sees what most men see: my youth, my lack of military experience, my physical frailty. He doesn't understand that power comes in many forms. I was tasked with gathering information, the mood of the veterans, the loyalties of key centurions, the price of grain in the markets. Everything mattered. Everything was political. While Octavian maneuvered through the intricacies of senatorial politics, I built a network of informants that extended from the highest houses on the Palatine to the taverns of the Subura. The veterans were the key. Caesar's legionaries, now retired to farms across Italy, held both military skill and voting power. Octavian emptied his personal treasury to pay the bequests that Antony had withheld, selling family properties and borrowing heavily. Is it wise to begin your political life in debt? I asked him once. He was counting out coins himself, meticulous as always. These men fought for my father. Their loyalty cannot be measured in sesterces, but their respect can be earned through honor. Caesar promised them this money. I will deliver it. I helped organize the payments, traveling to veteran colonies, looking into the weathered faces of men who had conquered Gaul with Caesar. They were skeptical at first, this slender youth claiming Caesar's name and legacy, but the money spoke loudly, as did Octavian's dignity and clear reverence for his adoptive father. Meanwhile, Rome's political landscape shifted like sand. Brutus and Cassius, Caesar's assassins, found their position untenable and fled to the east. Cicero emerged as a powerful voice in the Senate, initially supporting Octavian as a counterweight to Antony, whom he despised. "He thinks to use me as his puppet," Octavian confided in me after a particularly flattering speech from Cicero. "A young, malleable Caesar to be directed by the great defender of the Republic." "And are you malleable?" I asked, though I knew the answer. His smile was thin. "Only when it serves my purpose. Cicero forgets that I bear Caesar's name now. I will honor what that means." Meanwhile, the dance with Antony grew more complex. Open hostility gave way to reluctant alliance, then back to enmity. When Antony was declared a public enemy after taking his legions to Gaul, Octavian made the decision that would define our course. "We must raise an army," he told me privately. I pointed out the obvious. "The Senate won't grant you command. You're 19 years old with no military experience." "Then I'll take command," he replied, his voice soft but implacable. "Caesar's veterans will follow Caesar's son." What followed was our first taste of civil conflict. I found myself organizing troops despite having only theoretical knowledge of military matters. What I lacked in experience, I made up for in methodical planning and a willingness to learn from the veteran centurions who joined our cause. The first real shock came when the political winds shifted again, and Octavian marched those same troops on Rome itself. The Senate, which had refused him the consulship, suddenly found 8 legions at the city gates. I remember the stunned faces of the senators as they reversed their position and granted him the office that they had denied only days before. Later, in private, I questioned the action. "We've set a dangerous precedent, using Roman troops against Rome itself." Octavian was reviewing dispatches, seemingly untroubled. "Sulla did it. Caesar did it. The Republic has been dying for 50 years, Agrippa. We're not killing it. We're determining what will replace it." Then came the pact that would change everything. The Second Triumvirate, an official alliance between Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus, granted extraordinary powers to restore the Republic. The price of this alliance was the proscriptions, death lists of their political enemies, including, to my horror, Cicero himself. I still remember Octavian's face when he returned from the meeting where the names were decided. Pale, composed, but with something haunted in his eyes. "It's done," he said simply. I didn't ask for details. Some burdens were his alone to bear, though I would have taken them if I could. Instead, I focused on what came next, the pursuit of Brutus and Cassius, who had raised armies in the east. My first true command in Gaul taught me what no book or tutor could, the weight of men's lives in my hands. I was young, barely into my 20s, facing grizzled tribal chieftains and hardened Roman veterans who measured me with skeptical eyes. Those early campaigns were a baptism in blood and strategy, in learning when to negotiate and when to strike without mercy. I remember a night before a decisive battle against rebellious Gallic tribes. My tent was lit by a single oil lamp, campaign maps spread before me, the sounds of the legion at rest humming in the background. A centurion entered. Rufus, I believe, a man who had served under Caesar himself. "The men wonder if we attack at dawn," he said bluntly. "We do," I confirmed. "Tell them to prepare." He hesitated, unusual for a man of his experience. "The enemy holds the high ground, sir. Their numbers are greater." "They're divided," I explained, pointing to the map. 3 tribal factions with old grievances. They've allied against us, but that alliance is fragile. We'll strike here, at their center, where the tribal boundaries meet. When pressure is applied, old hatreds will resurface. Rufus studied the plan, his weathered face thoughtful. "Caesar would have approved," he said finally, and I felt a surge of pride that I tried not to show. The battle unfolded exactly as I had predicted. Our concentrated force drove a wedge between the tribal contingents, and within hours, their united front collapsed into 3 separate retreats. It was my first significant victory, won through understanding human nature as much as through military tactics. Word of the success reached Octavian, who was by then engaged in the complex dance of power with Antony after their victory at Philippi. The triumvirate was showing its first cracks, with Lepidus increasingly sidelined and tension growing between the other 2. When I returned to Rome, Octavian greeted me with rare public warmth. "My Agrippa returns victorious," he announced to the gathered dignitaries. "Rome's newest general proves his worth." Privately, he was more measured. "You've done well," he told me in his study, "but greater challenges await us. Sextus Pompey controls Sicily and threatens our grain supply. The people grow hungry and restless." Sextus Pompey, son of Caesar's old rival Pompey the Great, had established himself as a naval power, controlling the Mediterranean shipping lanes and styling himself as the scourge of Neptune. His pirate fleet raided the Italian coast with impunity, and attempts to defeat him had ended in embarrassing failures. "The problem is naval," I told Octavian after studying the reports. "We cannot beat him at sea with our current fleet." "Then we need a new fleet," he replied simply. What followed was perhaps my greatest engineering achievement to that point. I designed and oversaw the construction of a new type of warship, heavier, more stable, equipped with innovative grappling devices that would transform naval battles into the kind of infantry engagements that Roman forces excelled at. The key was Lake Avernus, near Naples, a protected body of water where we could train our sailors away from Pompey's prying eyes. I had a channel dug to connect it to the sea, creating in essence a private naval academy. There, through relentless drilling, I turned land soldiers into marines and inexperienced captains into a coordinated fleet. When we finally met Pompey's forces off Naulochus in 36 BCE, the result was decisive. My new ships, with their corvus boarding bridges and skilled marines, overwhelmed Pompey's more maneuverable but lighter vessels. By day's end, we had captured or sunk most of his fleet. Sextus Pompey fled to the east, where he would eventually meet his death. But it was Actium, 5 years later, that would secure our place in history. The final confrontation with Antony and Cleopatra came after years of deteriorating relations. As reports filtered back of Antony's increasingly erratic behavior, proclaiming Cleopatra's son by Caesar as the legitimate heir, distributing Roman territories to his children with the Egyptian queen, adopting Eastern customs and dress. The political rhetoric in Rome turned venomous. Octavian, ever the master of public opinion, painted Antony as a traitor to Roman values, bewitched by a foreign queen and ready to subordinate Rome's interests to Egypt's. When he arranged to have Antony's will, or what he claimed was Antony's will, read publicly, revealing plans to be buried in Alexandria rather than Rome, the outrage was palpable. War was declared, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra, a clever political maneuver that framed the conflict as Rome against a foreign enemy rather than another civil war. As we prepared for the campaign, Octavian called me to his private quarters. He looked tired, the weight of a decade of struggle evident in the lines around his eyes. "It ends with this, one way or another," he said. "Either we emerge victorious and united, or Rome fractures permanently." I nodded, understanding the stakes. Antony is still beloved by many of his troops. He's an experienced general. "And you are a better one," Octavian replied with uncharacteristic directness. "I'll handle the political battlefield. The military one is yours." And so, we came to Actium in 31 BCE, where the fate of Rome would be decided. Antony and Cleopatra had established a massive camp on the promontory, with their fleet anchored in the gulf below. Their combined forces outnumbered ours, but months of blockade had taken a toll on their supplies and morale. My strategy was patience, cutting off their supply lines, preventing reinforcements, waiting for disease and hunger to do what our swords might not. It worked better than I had dared hope. Deserters came to our camp daily, bringing intelligence and weakening Antony's position. When Antony finally decided to break out with his fleet, I was ready. The battle itself was chaotic, as sea battles always are. The smoke of burning ships, the screams of drowning men, the crash of ramming timbers. I commanded from a swift Liburnian galley, directing our squadrons to cut off any attempt by Antony's larger vessels to escape to open water. The turning point came when Cleopatra's squadron suddenly raised their sails and fled through a gap in our lines, with Antony following in a fast quinquereme. The sight of their leaders abandoning them broke the remaining Egyptian and Antonian forces. By sunset, the sea was littered with the wreckage of their fleet, and their army, still on shore, surrendered within days. Victory was complete, but as I watched Octavian receive the news, his expression was complex, relief mixed with something like regret. He and Antony had been allies once, then enemies, then allies again before this final break. There was history there that even I wasn't fully privy to. "He was once a great Roman," Octavian said quietly when we were alone. "He chose Egypt over Rome," I replied. Octavian shook his head slightly. "He chose love over duty, a human failing, not a Roman one." I didn't know how to respond to that. Duty had always been my lodestar, as it had been for Octavian. The idea of setting it aside for personal feelings was foreign to me then. Perhaps it still is, even now as I contemplate the end of my own story. The memories recede like a tide, leaving me once more aware of my bedchamber and the failing body that confines me here. The light has shifted. It must be late afternoon now. My mouth is dry again, But before I can call for water, I hear voices in the antechamber, one of them instantly recognizable even after all these years. Augustus enters without ceremony, dismissing my attendance with a gesture. Though he now bears the weight of empire on his shoulders, to me he is still in many ways the calculating young man I met in Apollonia. Time has whitened his hair and added dignity to his bearing, but his eyes remain the same, keen, assessing, rarely revealing more than he intends. "My Agrippa," he says, taking the seat beside my bed. The possessive is both affectionate and accurate. I have been his in all the ways that matter: his general, his advisor, his friend, his son-in-law, the executor of his vision. "Caesar," I respond, my voice stronger than I expected. Even in private, I rarely use his personal name anymore. The weight of his titles, Augustus, Princeps, Imperator, has created a distance between us that affection can bridge, but never quite eliminate. He studies my face with the same attention he might give a diplomatic dispatch. "The physicians say the fever has worsened." Physicians say many things, most of them wrong. A smile touches his lips. Still the pragmatist, even now. He reaches out, surprising me by taking my hand. Such gestures don't come naturally to him. "Rome needs you to recover." "Rome?" I reply. "Or you? Is there a difference?" he asks, and for a moment I glimpse the vulnerability beneath the imperial mask. Augustus has created a system of governance that theoretically could continue without him, but it is held together by the force of his personality and the network of loyalties he has carefully constructed. Of those loyalties, mine has been perhaps the most constant. "Rome will endure," I tell him. "It always does." He doesn't respond directly to this. Instead, he changes the subject. "Julia asks about you daily. She wanted to come, but I thought..." He trails off, uncharacteristically uncertain. My wife, his daughter, the political marriage that became something more complex over time. "It's better she remember me as I was," I say, sparing him the need to explain. "Julia, beautiful and clever, deserves more than watching an old man struggle for breath." Augustus nods, relieved. "The children are well. Young Gaius shows great promise. Perhaps he'll have your military instincts." We both know this for the hopeful fiction it is. My sons by Julia, Gaius and Lucius, are being groomed as Augustus's heirs, but neither shows the particular aptitude for command that defined my career. Still, the fiction comforts us both. This idea that something of my abilities might continue in the next generation. The Pantheon renovations continue, Augustus says after a moment of silence. The marble for the new portico arrived from Carrara last week. Magnificent pieces. My temple to all the gods, one of my proudest achievements as an architect and builder. Ensure the drainage channels are properly angled, I tell him, falling automatically into the role of master builder. The original design had flaws that caused pooling during heavy rains. He smiles again, more genuinely this time, always attending to details others would overlook. That has been your gift, Agrippa, seeing what needed to be done and doing it without fanfare or glory-seeking. The compliment warms me, not just for its content, but for the sincere appreciation behind it. Augustus has never been free with praise, making his rare expressions of approval all the more valuable. We sit in companionable silence for a time, two old friends who have shared too much to need constant conversation. Through the window comes the distant sound of hammering, another building project underway in the eternal construction site that is Rome. How fitting that my final days are accompanied by the sounds of creation. Do you remember, Augustus says suddenly, the night before Actium, when you came to my tent with the final battle plans? Of course. How could I forget? The culmination of years of preparation, the eve of the conflict that would determine the fate of Rome itself. You were so certain, he continues, his gaze distant with memory. Not arrogant, never that, but absolutely clear in your strategy. I slept soundly that night, knowing you had matters in hand. It may have been the most important gift you ever gave me, that certainty, that peace of mind. I'm moved by this confession, this acknowledgement of the trust between us. We complemented each other, I reply. Your vision, my execution. More than that, he insists. You've been... He pauses, searching for words, which is unusual for a man renowned for his eloquence. You've been the foundation upon which I built everything. The one person who never wanted my position, only wanted to help me secure it. A stiff knock on the door interrupts before I can reply, and Caesar is beckoned away by urgent matters. I will visit you again soon, old friend, he assures me before reluctantly leaving my side. Once more, I find myself in solitude, contemplating my existence as it slowly draws to an end. After Actium, with the civil wars finally concluded, Augustus, still called Octavian then, though already holding power unmatched in Rome's history, made a declaration that has echoed through the years. I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. What fewer remember is that much of that transformation passed through my hands. Peace brought opportunity for creation rather than destruction. While Augustus consolidated his political position through careful reforms and the appearance of republican restoration, I turned my attention to the physical fabric of the city itself. I remember standing in the Campus Martius, the field of Mars, a vast and underutilized area of Rome that had historically been used for military exercises and occasional public gatherings. Now, with legions no longer needing to assemble within the city, it presented a canvas for urban renewal. It could be the new heart of Rome, I told Augustus, as we surveyed the area one crisp autumn morning. Public buildings, gardens, baths, amenities for the people that will also serve to commemorate your victories. He considered the vision, always practical even amid grandeur. The cost would be enormous, and visible daily to every citizen, I countered. What better use for the spoils of Egypt than to improve the lives of Romans? They will associate your rule with comfort and beauty. He smiled at that, appreciating the political calculation behind the aesthetic proposal. Very well, draw up your plans, but remember our discussions on architectural language. Roman forms, not Greek excess, I finished for him. Dignity over ostentation. Augustus had strong views on architecture as an expression of political values. While he appreciated Greek artistry, he believed Roman buildings should reflect Roman virtues: strength, practicality, gravity. I shared this view, though perhaps with more flexibility regarding innovation. The Pantheon became my first major project in this new era of peace. A temple dedicated to all the gods, revolutionary in its design. Unlike traditional Roman temples, which were typically rectangular with a portico, I envisioned a circular structure crowned by a magnificent dome representing the heavenly sphere. The engineering challenges were formidable. No one had attempted a concrete dome of such scale before. I spent months working with the finest architects and builders in Rome, developing new concrete mixtures that would be lighter toward the top of the dome, innovative coffers that would reduce weight while maintaining structural integrity, and a perfectly calculated oculus at the center that would eliminate the need for a potentially weak keystone. I recall one particular argument with the master builder, a grizzled Etruscan named Varro, who had worked on projects throughout Italy. "It cannot be done," he insisted, pointing to my drawings. "A dome of this span will collapse under its own weight." "It can be done," I countered, "if we think differently about the forces involved. The dome must act as a unified structure, with stresses distributed evenly. The concrete mixture will be adjusted as we build upward, heavier at the base, lighter near the oculus." Varro shook his head, unconvinced. "Theory is not practice, Agrippa. When the centering is removed, you'll have ruins, not a temple. Then we'll ensure the centering is perfect," I replied, unwilling to abandon the vision. "And the concrete will cure fully before we remove a single support." In the end, my conviction prevailed, though I incorporated several of Varro's practical suggestions into the final design. When the dome was completed and the wooden supports carefully removed, I stood inside the temple holding my breath, half expecting to hear the ominous crack of failing concrete. Instead, there was only reverent silence as workers and architects alike gazed upward at the perfect hemisphere above, with its oculus opening to the sky like an eye to heaven. Augustus came to inspect the completed building, walking slowly around its circumference before entering the vast interior space. He stood for a long time, saying nothing, his face illuminated by the shaft of light from the oculus. "You've created something truly Roman," he said finally, "yet unlike anything Rome has seen before. It honors the gods while demonstrating the ingenuity of men." His approval meant more than any formal honor or title could have. The Pantheon became a symbol of the new age. Augustus's political stability manifested in architectural innovation. But the Pantheon was only the beginning. I oversaw the construction of the Septa Julia, a massive voting enclosure, the Diribitorium, the largest roofed building in Rome, where votes were counted, and the original Basilica of Neptune, commemorating our naval victories. Perhaps most significantly for the daily lives of Romans, I revolutionized the city's water system. Rome had several aqueducts already, but they were inadequate for the growing population and often poorly maintained. I restored the existing structures and built the Aqua Julia, named in honor of Augustus's family line, to bring fresh water from sources miles outside the city. Water management became something of an obsession for me. I assembled a team of engineers and established what would become the permanent water board, ensuring that the aqueducts would be maintained properly long after my time. I I wrote a detailed treatise on water systems that I hope will guide future generations of builders. The culmination of this work was the creation of the first major public baths in Rome, the Baths of Agrippa, adjacent to the Pantheon. Unlike the small private bathing establishments that existed previously, these were monumental in scale and open to all citizens, regardless of wealth or status. I remember the day they opened to the public, the amazement on people's faces as they entered the soaring caldarium with its heated floors and walls, the laughter echoing in the spacious frigidarium as citizens cooled themselves after steam rooms, the animated discussions in the exercise yards and reading rooms. It was Rome as I had always envisioned it could be, civilized, communal, magnificent. Augustus came to visit on the third day, moving among the people with minimal escort. He found me in the administrative offices, reviewing supply schedules for the olive oil used in the baths. "You've given Rome more than victory," he told me, gesturing toward the sounds of the contented crowds. "You've given them civilization they can touch and use daily. Clean water and public hygiene will do more for Rome's greatness than another conquered province," I replied. He smiled at that. "Always practical, my Agrippa. While I concern myself with laws and governance, you ensure the sewers flow and the water runs clear." There was no mockery in his words, only appreciation for our complementary roles. Augustus understood, as few rulers do, that enduring power rests as much on functional infrastructure as on military might or political acumen. For all my achievements in war and building, family life came less naturally to me. My marriages, like much in my life, were shaped by duty and political necessity, though not without moments of genuine affection and connection. My first marriage, to Caecilia Attica, seems distant now, like something from another life. She was the daughter of Cicero's friend Atticus, a wealthy and cultured man who had managed the remarkable feat of remaining neutral during the civil wars. Our union was arranged when I was still establishing myself, a useful connection to the equestrian aristocracy for a young man of modest origins. I remember her as quiet and scholarly, with a love of Greek poetry that I admired but didn't share. My duties kept me away for long periods, first with Octavian's campaigns against Pompey's son, then with my own commands in Gaul. When I returned to Rome after significant victories, I found I had become a stranger in my own home. "You speak to me as you might to a respected acquaintance," Caecilia said to me one evening as we dined in formal silence. "With courtesy, but no intimacy. The campaigns leave little room for softer thoughts," I replied, not unjustly. "War hardens a man, focuses his mind on survival and strategy rather than tender emotions." She studied me with sad understanding. "You've given yourself entirely to Rome and to Caesar. There is nothing left for a wife." I couldn't deny it. My path had been chosen long before. That day in Apollonia when I pledged myself to Octavian's cause. Everything since, my marriages, my family connections, my personal desires, had been secondary to that commitment. We parted without rancor. Caecilia eventually remarried, and our daughter Vipsania was raised primarily in her household, though I maintained contact and arranged her marriage to Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, when the time came. Another political alliance in the complex web of relationships that secured the imperial family's position. My second marriage to Marcella, Augustus's niece, was more explicitly political. By then, I was one of the most powerful men in Rome, Augustus's right hand in both military and civic affairs. Binding me closer to the imperial family through marriage made strategic sense. Marcella was intelligent and politically astute, well aware of her role in her uncle's grand designs. Our relationship was one of mutual respect and shared purpose rather than passion. She understood the demands of my position and made no claims on time I couldn't give. I recall one conversation that exemplified our partnership. We were attending a reception for Eastern dignitaries, standing somewhat apart from the main gathering, observing the complex dance of diplomacy and flattery. The Parthian envoy has spoken 3 times with Sentius Saturninus, Marcella noted quietly. They believe you favor a more aggressive Eastern policy than Augustus. They're probing for divisions they can exploit, I replied, impressed by her observation. We should inform your uncle. She nodded, then added, I've already arranged to have Julia mention it casually over breakfast tomorrow. It will seem less like formal intelligence that way. I looked at her with new appreciation. You understand the game well. I was raised to it, she said simply. My mother taught me that real power often works through indirect channels. In many ways, Marcella was the perfect wife for a man in my position, politically valuable, socially adept, undemanding of emotional resources I had little capacity to provide. Yet even this carefully arranged marriage would be sacrificed to greater political necessity. When Augustus's daughter Julia was widowed by the death of Marcella's brother Marcellus, a new alignment became expedient. Julia was Augustus's only biological child, the living link in his dynastic plans. Her husband would inevitably be positioned as a potential successor to the principate. He asks too much, Marcella said, when I told her of Augustus's wish that we divorce so I could marry Julia. There was no accusation in her voice, only a clear-eyed assessment of the political reality we both understood. It isn't my ambition, I assured her, which was true. I had never sought to be more than Augustus's most loyal supporter. But it is his plan, she replied. And when has either of us refused him anything? So ended my second marriage, dissolved not through failure, but through political calculation. Marcella eventually married Aulus Antonius, son of Mark Antony, in another move that bound former opponents into the imperial system. My marriage to Julia began with more ceremony than either of my previous unions. Augustus made it clear that this was no ordinary match, but a matter of state importance. Julia was young, beautiful, and spirited, far different from my previous wives, and from me as well. Our last significant conversation remains clear in my memory. It was shortly before I left for my final campaign in Pannonia, where I contracted the illness that has remained with me since. We were in the garden of our house on the Palatine, the evening air filled with the scent of roses. You're leaving again, she said. Not a question, but a statement of the inevitable pattern of our lives. The situation requires personal attention. The tribal confederations are growing bolder. She nodded, picking a rose and twirling it between her fingers. My father says you're the only one he trusts to resolve it without excessive bloodshed. He exaggerates my abilities, as always. No? she said, looking directly at me with an intensity that was startling. He doesn't. I've grown up watching you both. My father imagines what Rome could be. You make it real. He provides the will. You provide the way. I was moved by this assessment, coming from someone who had observed the partnership between Augustus and me from a unique perspective. You understand more than you reveal, I said. A sad smile touched her lips. I am my father's daughter. Understanding power is my inheritance, even if wielding it never will be. She hesitated, then added, I haven't been the wife you deserved, Agrippa. Nor I the husband you deserved, I replied honestly. We have done our duty to Rome and to your father. Perhaps that is all that can be asked of either of us. She stepped closer then, and in a gesture that surprised me, placed the rose she'd been holding in my hand, closing my fingers around it. Return safely, she said. The children need their father. I did return, but already ill, the mysterious fever from the Pannonian marshes sapping my strength. Julia nursed me with unexpected dedication during those first difficult months, sitting by my bedside reading Greek poetry, or simply keeping silent company. It was perhaps the closest we ever came to the companionship that marriage should provide. Night has fallen. My chamber is lit by a single oil lamp that casts elongated shadows across the painted walls. The fever ebbs momentarily, leaving my mind clear enough to grapple with the questions that press more urgently as death approaches. What does it mean to have lived honorably, to have fulfilled one's duty? And what regrets linger when the accounts of a life are tallied? Honor for a Roman has always been tied to service, to family, to state, to the gods. By that measure, I have lived honorably. From that first pledge to Octavian in Apollonia to my final campaigns in Pannonia, I have served Rome with unwavering loyalty. My name is linked with victories that secured our borders, buildings that improved civic life, administrative reforms that strengthened governance. And yet honor is more than the accumulation of public achievements. It resides also in personal conduct, in the keeping of one's word, in fairness toward allies and enemies alike. I think of the proscriptions after the formation of the Second Triumvirate, the death lists that claimed Cicero and hundreds of others deemed enemies of the new regime. Though I did not draw up those lists, I did not oppose them either. I accepted the political necessity of eliminating opposition, the brutal arithmetic of power consolidation. Was that honorable? Or was it a compromise with evil that taints everything that came after? Such questions have no simple answers. Rome was drowning in civil war. The Republic had failed, corrupted from within by ambition and inequality. Something new had to emerge from the chaos. Augustus's vision, his restoration that was really a transformation, offered stability after decades of bloodshed. If some blood was spilled to secure that stability, history might judge it a necessary price. Or so I have told myself through the years. Duty is clearer to me than honor. I have always known my duty and fulfilled it without hesitation. When Augustus needed a general, I led armies. When he needed an administrator, I managed provinces. When he needed an architect, I built monuments. When he needed a family connection, I married his daughter. My life has been shaped entirely by this sense of duty, to Augustus personally, and to his vision of Rome. It has been a North Star, unwavering, guiding every decision. There is comfort in such clarity of purpose, in knowing one's place in the order of things. Yet duty, too, has its complexities. There were times when my duty to Augustus seemed at odds with my duty to Rome itself. Moments when his personal interests diverged from the public good. Few in position to observe would have noticed these divergences. They were subtle, matters of emphasis rather than outright conflict. In such moments, I typically found ways to reconcile the competing claims, to serve both the man and the state he embodied, but not always, not perfectly. Regrets. The word itself carries weight, pressing down on my chest alongside the illness that steals my breath. What do I regret? Looking back across the span of 51 years, I regret the men who died under my command in unnecessary engagements, battles fought for strategic advantage rather than defensive necessity. War has its own logic, its own momentum, and even the most judicious commander sometimes sacrifices lives for objectives that later seem insignificant. I regret aspects of my family life, the distance I maintained from my first daughter, the political nature of my marriages, my inability to give more of myself to my children. Duty to Rome left little room for duty to family, and that balance may have been wrong. Most poignantly, I regret that I will not see my sons grow to manhood, will not guide them through the complexities of the position they will inherit. Gaius and Lucius are still boys, being groomed as Augustus's heirs. Will they understand the delicate balance of power their grandfather has created? Will they maintain the fiction of a republic that overlays the reality of monarchical rule? I have tried to instill in them the values that have guided me: loyalty, duty, practical wisdom. But they are being raised in luxury as princes of the imperial house, not as common soldiers who must earn advancement. I fear they lack the tempering experiences that forge character. Yet, I remain hopeful that they will honor the legacy bestowed upon them. I have to, as I hope to see them again one last time before the fever takes me. Morning brings a curious clarity, as if the night's reflections have settled something within me. The physicians exchange meaningful glances when they examine me. They need not speak their prognosis aloud. My body, once capable of enduring forced marches and the rigors of campaign life, now betrays me with each labored breath. Visitors come throughout the day, senators paying respects, military officers I once commanded, architects and engineers I've worked with on Rome's transformation. Each conversation feels weighted with finality, with words chosen carefully to honor what we all know is a farewell. Midday brings Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, and the husband of my daughter, Vipsania. Our relationship has always been complicated, a mixture of professional respect and personal tension. He stands stiffly at my bedside, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. The Pannonian situation is stable, he reports, as if delivering a military briefing. Your arrangements there have proven effective. You'll need to maintain a presence along the Danube, I tell him, falling into the familiar role of advisor. The tribal confederations respect strength above all. He nods, making a mental note. Then, with visible effort, he shifts to a more personal tone. Vipsania sends her regards. She holds you in high esteem. My daughter, a woman now, with children of her own, yet still in my mind sometimes the solemn little girl who watched me with serious eyes on my infrequent visits. Tell her I think of her often, I reply, which is true now if not always. Tiberius hesitates, then adds, Your grandchildren are well. The boy shows aptitude for mathematics. This unexpected personal detail touches me more deeply than formal expressions of respect could. Like his grandfather, then, I say, attempting a smile. Numbers have always made more sense to me than poetry. A ghost of a smile crosses Tiberius's normally stern face. The world needs both builders and poets, I suppose. It does, I agree, though Rome has perhaps had enough of poet rulers for a time. We both know I refer to Antony, whose poetic pretensions accompanied his downfall. After he leaves, my sons are brought in, Gaius, 12 years old, and Lucius, 9, both wearing the serious expressions of children trying to comprehend mortality. They stand beside my bed, uncertain and solemn in their youth. Come closer, I tell them, and they approach, Gaius protective of his younger brother. I study their faces, searching for traces of myself, of Julia, of the future they represent. You must listen carefully now. There are things I may not have another chance to tell you. They nod in unison, their eyes wide. You have been born to extraordinary privilege, I begin, choosing my words with care. Your grandfather has placed Rome's future in your hands. This is both an honor and a terrible responsibility. We will make you proud, father, Gaius says earnestly. Pride is less important than wisdom, I tell him. Learn to listen before you speak. Observe before you act. Understand that power exists to serve Rome, not to serve itself. They absorb this solemnly, though I wonder how much meaning these abstract concepts hold for children their age. Perhaps the words will return to them later, when they face the realities of leadership. Remember that buildings and monuments mean nothing if the people suffer, I continue. I have built aqueducts because clean water matters more than marble statues. I have created public baths because the well-being of ordinary Romans creates stability more surely than military conquest. Lucius, always the more sensitive of the two, reaches out hesitantly to touch my hand. Will you get better, father? The directness of the question, the hope in his young face, these pierce me more deeply than the physical pain of my illness. No, Lucius, I answer honestly. My time is ending, but yours is just beginning, and that gives me joy. The afternoon wears on. I drift in and out of sleep, the fever climbing again. Voices murmur outside my chamber, and then Augustus is there once more, alone this time, dismissing even his personal attendants. He looks tired, the weight of empire evident in the lines of his face. For a moment, I see not the Augustus of official portraiture, the ageless, serene princeps, but Octavian, as he truly is, a man of 50 who has survived plots, wars, and personal tragedies to create an unprecedented peace. You should rest, I tell him, my voice weaker than I would like. There will be time enough for rest, he replies, taking his customary seat beside my bed. Today, I would speak with my friend while I still can. The simple honesty of this statement affects me deeply. For all the political calculations that have defined our relationship, the friendship at its core has been real. We discuss the water system for a time, then the progress on various building projects, the situation in the provinces, the training of the Praetorian Guard. It is comfortable, familiar ground, the business of empire that has occupied our attention for decades. Eventually, though, the conversation turns more personal. "What troubles you, Caesar?" I ask finally, sensing something unspoken beneath his unusual philosophizing. He meets my gaze directly. "The succession. Tiberius lacks something essential. Your sons are too young. Julia..." He trails off, pain crossing his features at the mention of his daughter, whose behavior has become increasingly problematic. "You've created institutions that can endure beyond individuals," I remind him. "The Principate, the Senate, the administrative structures. Institutions shaped by and dependent on individuals," he counters. "You know this better than anyone. Your death..." He stops, composing himself. "Your death leaves a void that cannot be filled." The naked admission of what my passing will mean to him personally moves me beyond words for a moment. We have rarely spoken so directly of our friendship, preferring to express it through action and shared purpose rather than emotional declarations. "You will find other hands to execute your vision," I say finally. "Not like mine, perhaps, but capable in their own ways." "It isn't just your competence," he says, frustration edging his voice. "It's your perspective, your counterbalance to my tendencies. You've never feared to tell me when I was wrong." I watch Augustus struggle with words, his usual eloquence faltering. In these private moments, the weight of empire seems to slip from his shoulders, revealing just Octavian, the young man I pledged myself to decades ago. "When we were young," he says softly, "did you ever imagine we would come this far?" "Not specifically," I admit, my voice growing weaker. "But I knew you were destined for greatness." He laughs, though the sound holds little mirth. "My greatness, as you call it, was built on your loyalty. The marble facade of Augustus rests on the solid foundation of Agrippa." The fever burns hotter now. I feel it consuming me from within, yet my mind remains clear enough to recognize the rare vulnerability in his expression. "Rome has never known a ruler like you," I tell him. "And I will never know another friend like you." His voice breaks slightly. "How will I rule without your counsel? Who will tell me when my ambition outpaces wisdom? Who will..." He stops abruptly, composing himself with visible effort. "You will find your way," I assure him, though each word costs me more effort. "You always have. With you beside me," he insists, leaning closer. "Always with you beside me. Even at Actium, it was your victory, not mine. The aqueducts, the Pantheon, the peace we've built, all bear your imprint more than mine." A spasm of pain grips me, and I cannot hide my grimace. Augustus calls for the physicians, but I wave them away with what strength remains in my arm. "No need," I whisper. "It's time." "Not yet," he says, and for once, the most powerful man in the world cannot command what he wishes. "Please, Agrippa." I feel my grip on life loosening, like a ship casting off its mooring lines. "It has been the greatest honor," I manage, each word struggle against the tide pulling me away. The honor was mine, Augustus says, now holding my hand tightly in both of his. His imperial mask has fallen completely away, leaving only raw emotion. My friend, my Agrippa. I try to speak again, to tell him one last time of my faith in him, in Rome, in what we've built together. But the words won't come. Instead, I squeeze his hand with the last of my strength, hoping he understands what I cannot say. Darkness gathers at the edges of my vision. The pain recedes. I hear Augustus speaking, his voice seeming to come from very far away, and then the darkness takes me. Augustus remains motionless long after the final breath leaves Agrippa's body. Tears, those rare visitors, stream freely down his face now that no one remains to witness them. He who has conquered the known world sits defeated by death's simple finality. Marcus, he whispers, gently releasing the hand of his oldest friend to place it across the still chest. With unexpected tenderness, Augustus leans forward and presses his lips to Agrippa's forehead. The silence of the chamber presses against him like a physical weight. For the first time in decades, Augustus feels utterly alone with his thoughts, without the steady counterbalance that Agrippa had always provided. "How shall I rule without you?" he asks the silent room, his voice breaking. "How shall Rome stand without her greatest builder? The Senate will speak empty praises tomorrow, not understanding what we've truly lost, what I've lost." He studies the face before him, now peaceful in death. How strange to see those features, once so animated with practical intelligence, now still and silent. The face that had been beside his own through triumph and disaster, through the building of an empire. "They will never know," Augustus murmurs, "that half of what they attribute to me was your doing." A lifetime of memories floods through him. Two young men in Apollonia, planning a future neither could fully envision. The tense councils of war before Actium, standing together as the dome of the Pantheon was completed. The quiet evenings discussing the future of Rome over wine. "I loved you more truly than perhaps anyone in this life," he confesses to unhearing ears. "Not for what you could give me, though you gave everything, but for who you were, the one man who never feared to tell me the truth." He rises slowly, suddenly looking older. The weight of empire, once shared between them, now rests on his shoulders alone. At the doorway, Augustus pauses for one last look. "I will miss you dearly, old friend," he says softly. "May you find peace with the gods you honored through your works." He straightens his shoulders with effort, composing his features into the imperial mask that the world expects. Rome waits, and Augustus must continue without his most trusted advisor, his most loyal general, his dearest friend. The door closes with a gentle finality behind him, but not before a final whisper escapes his lips. "Farewell, my Agrippa."